Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Pro Tips. This week we'll be talking about how the cupping parameters affects your cupping experience. Specifically, we'll be talking about grind size. Now, how does grind size affect your cupping experience? Now, usually in the SCA specifications, we're always told to grind a coarse grind size. But in recent years, I've come across many roasters who grind at a much finer grind size. So this week, we decided to do a quick side-by-side comparison of the same coffee, one ground at a coarse, normal cupping grind size, and the other one in a finer grind size, similar to what you would use for a mocha pot. And these are the results. So at the beginning with the dry fragrance, there was actually a difference between the coarse and the fine grind size. The fine grind size actually had a slightly stronger intensity and roundness to the dry fragrance as opposed to the coarse one. So you might actually score it maybe a 0.25 points higher just because of that better roundedness, complexity and intensity. So do take note, when we talked last week about how the dry fragrance is the most important, it is, but it's still slightly affected by this grind size. The other thing that we did notice throughout the entire cupping is the acidity and the quality of the acidity in both cups. With the coarser grind size, it was slightly more sour. The quality of acidity was still good, but it wasn't as balanced as the fine grind size. The fine grind size was less sour, it was more balanced, it was sweeter, and the body was a lot heavier and more structured. So there's a very noticeable difference right from the get-go between the coarse and the fine grind size, with the fine grind size tasting a lot more balanced with a heavier and more structured body, and the sweetness and acidity were a lot more balanced. It was more stable as opposed to the coarse grind size where there was a slight sourness. So the grind size does make a very huge impact on the cupping experience, and this is something that you have to pay attention to whenever you're cupping, whether it's at your own shop, which it should be consistent. When you're cupping outside, it's something you should ask so that you can understand how it's going to be different as opposed to what you normally use for your cupping session. So now, what did we learn from this experiment? The one thing that we did notice is that throughout the 15 minutes, the coarse grind size was continuously improving and getting better over time, whereas the fine grind size did fluctuate and go downhill before it rebounded. So we understand from this experiment why people want to cup at a coarse grind size, because especially when there's a lot of people, there isn't enough time to cup the coffee quickly enough to experience the fluctuations that you will get in a fine grind size. So if you're out there cupping with other people or you're hosting a cupping, it's better to go with a coarse grind size, which will prolong the time of the coffee where it tastes good and allow everybody a chance to experience the coffee. On the other hand, we can really appreciate the added insights that the fine grind size gives us. It allowed us to taste qualities and faults with the coffee that were not present in the coarse cupping grind size. So if you're cupping alone or if you're doing QC at your roastery, I would recommend to go with a finer grind size because it does allow you to taste more of the coffee, including any possible roasting faults like the bitterness that we experience in this coffee. The only catch is you have to be pretty fast in cupping, otherwise you might miss out on these flavors if you're cupping a large number of coffees at one go. You might not have time to cover all the bases with the coffees because the extractions happen at a much quicker pace as opposed to the coarse grind size. Okay, that's it for this week. We'll be back every Thursday with more pro tips like this. If you're enjoying it, please click the subscribe button below, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, leave us a comment, and we'll see you next week.